Hello, everybody, and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me, as always, I have Jer.
Hello.
Alex.
Hey.
And Ben.
Hello, yes, I am Wheeler.
A reminder, the North 100 is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. Let us start today with the opening segment. We always do the best card you're not playing. Up today, we have Jer. Jer, tell me your secrets.
All right, so this is a card, one of the spicier includes from my Friday Night Paper Fight Bant Blink deck, but I think it has a wider array of applications after I've played with it some more. It's Bramble Sovereign.
Oh, baby.
So it's a Dryad, it's a creature. It costs 2 green, and you get a 4/4.
Not bad.
And it reads, whenever another token creature enters the battlefield, non-token, you may pay 1 and a green. If you do, that creature's controller creates a token copy that's a copy of that creature. So it works for both players, so if your opponent tries to cast Phage, you just win.
Wait, okay, no.
He's not wrong.
But I imagine you're rarely, if ever, never, using this to copy your opponent's creatures. You're just using it to copy your own, and I think that effect is good enough in a mid-range creature deck when you start paying 1 and a green for Thragtusk or a second copy of Verdurous Gearhulk. Or a second copy of Archon of Valor's Reach, and then you get to lock your opponent out of instants and sorceries. There's a lot of really powerful things you can do in this this card that I think it's at its best in the Blink deck, but the Blink deck is a pretty niche deck, and I think this card is good enough.
Well, you're trying to abuse it for the ETBs, right?
Yeah, to see less fringe play. I think the fact that it's a 4/4, it stands up to removal really well. It's a reasonable thing to just tap out for on turn 4 against both control and aggressive strategies because it offers a reasonable clock by itself, and your opponent, if it resolves against control and doesn't get removed, they need to counter every creature you play for the rest of the game. Like letting it resolve and then removing your creature no longer works. Really forces them to have a Wrath, and against aggro, the 4/4 body is a really huge brick wall. And then it becomes much easier to stabilize when you can untap, play a 3-drop. Like if you untap with this against aggro, then play Kitchen Finks, copy Kitchen Finks. Aggro is literally never winning.
Holy moly! Okay, that's rad. Cool. I hear you like life gain. Well, fantastic. Let us move on to today's theme. Today we're going to do a rare 2-part split episode. Help me with some magic mechanics here. Fuse. We're doing a fuse.
No, that would mean they could watch both at the same time.
Meld.
Nice.
Meld. Nice. Beej with the magic mechanics in the background there. A very nice meld episode. On one half, we're going to do an event recap. So a couple weeks ago, as advertised, we had a Highlander Friday Night Paper Fight where the 4 of us battled to determine who was the superior host. And
it was Jer.
I was going to say, as a heads up, there will be spoilers.
Whoops!
So if you don't want spoilers, too late. But we're going to get in depth onto what we played and stuff like that. And in the second part of the episode, we're going to talk about incorrect assumptions. When you think your opponent's on something and you get got, or trying to pass that feeling onto your opponent. Sort of like a higher level assumption where you know the meta. And you know a deck really well, or at least you think you do, and that informs your play decisions. And oh boy, are you wrong.
Can I steal some notes from OSW Review?
Go for it.
Mind games.
Mind games, yeah. And to note, that's different from, say, metagaming, you know, the slight tweaks to a deck. This is, we'll get more to that later. So let's talk about the event recap. Let's start off with what were we playing? Jer, what did you bring on the last Friday?
I played a Bant Blink deck, so it's got no combos, just a really, really strong value-oriented deck. It's got some engines, but just a really high synergy-based deck that plays a lot of ETB creatures and flicker effects.
Very cool.
I brought Boros Aggro. I decided to set my fastball aside, play some creatures, and turn them sideways. Not quite a Voltron style, so not too much equipment, just like the best equipment. Not too low to the ground, not quite mid-range, just Boros Aggro with gear and some double strike. Alex, what did you bring?
Black Mold, because I had some new toys to play with.
Like what?
There's Pelt Collector.
Ooh.
Your boy. And some card called Assassin's Trophy.
Ah, you mean destroy literally anything, .card.
Yeah, that's fine. Just give him one of those.
And Ben, what did you bring?
I made a huge mistake. I brought a deck that I called Hollow Tog, which has no real resemblance to any other worldly Magic deck. It was a 4-color, no white, self-mill, aggressive strategy based on delve creatures.
It was so cool in concept.
Yeah, it looked well. It didn't look great on paper. It looked
Disagree.
It looked neat on paper, and in theory, it could have been very powerful.
Yeah.
But in practice, it fell short, so to speak.
Uh-oh. And a reminder that if you find the Loading Ready Live replay of that episode, you'll find all the deck lists down there. We'll make sure to include a link to that VOD down below, rather than just cross-posting everything there. Let's talk about round one. Round one was Jer versus Ben. Gentlemen, give a little recap on what happened there.
So you know how there's that square on a Monopoly board that says "Go to jail"? My creatures landed on that board, I believe, 6 or 7 times.
So that was off the back of Palace Jailer. So Palace Jailer is a 4-mana white creature for 2 white. It's a 2/2. And when it enters the battlefield, it says exile target creature an opponent controls, or is it symmetrical? Can you target your own stuff?
It's opponent controls.
I think it's opponent controls.
Exile target creature an opponent controls for as long as you're the monarch, and then you become the monarch. This is Palace Jailer. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. And it's a 2/2. It's a human
Jailer.
Human soldier.
Yeah.
Arguably the best uncommon in white,
In
maybe.
conspiracy.
Well, I mean, Swords
Well,
and
at least
Plowshares
Path
is...
Exile.
Okay, fine.
So as Joe was saying,
Skyhunter.
his deck is a flicker deck. So how are you able to make a Palace Jailer, which you only had 1 copy, exile 6 creatures?
Well, I was able to utilize flicker effects in my deck, so I think I cast Eerie Interlude. I cast both halves of Momentary Blink. I cast Restoration Angel. I think there might have been a Flicker Wisp.
Yeah.
Holy
Sounds
moly.
about
I
right.
can't remember exactly,
I
but
blacked out in that matchup.
so did your creatures.
Yeah, well, see,
Wow.
I think my deck attacks decently. Like, my creatures have trample or
They're really
haste.
big.
They're very big.
Yeah.
And in fact, I have cards in my deck like Anger that allows to give all my creatures haste. Even with all that, I was not able to reclaim the Monarch at any point in time, and that jail stack just kept getting higher and higher.
Yeah.
Homie was earning his bonus.
All right. Round 2 was myself versus Alex in the Aggro Mirror.
Grr.
That classic matchup of Boros v. Golgari on the ground. How'd that go?
Didn't I choke on mana?
You definitely had some mana issues. I also got to experience the Joy, which is the mentor mechanic, and that new, what's that 1/1 for a
Swiftblade Vindicator.
and Swiftwood Vindicator, keyword.card. So I got it up to a
Keyword.
3/3
Yeah, that guy
with
was-
Vigilance, Trample, and Double Strike.
He was way better than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Even with no pump, that card was a pain.
Yeah.
Well, it just presents such a huge threat.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like, oh, it's just a 1. No, it's not a 1/1. It's a big pain.
It's a trap.
in your butt.
I really wanted to give that card Jite.
No, you're
Fair.
not allowed.
Then we went on to the not winners bracket, and we had Alex v. Ben. Gentlemen?
I was consumed by the greed of possibly having a Psychotog plus Berserk line.
Oh, that would have been sick.
It worked out in my head, but your combination of Vengevine plus creatures plus creature kill and discard put me in a bit of an awkward spot, and I died.
You love having cards in your bin.
I do like having cards in my graveyard, but I like it when it's on my terms.
You had a really interesting play, or really interesting decision to make. You had resolved Psychotog, which is one of the key creatures in your Holotog deck. And I believe Alex went to dismember it.
Yeah.
And
Oh, right.
I know I'm sitting there and I'm being like, are you going to try and save this creature? You had a couple cards in hand. You had a couple of cards in your graveyard. Dismember, notably, is not destroy target creature. It's give it -5/5. Why did you not save the Atog there?
it would require me to eat up a whole bunch of resources, because if I exile cards from, I mean, obviously discarding cards from your hand, that's down cards. And then the deck uses the graveyard as a resource for power boosting effects, like with Enigma Drake, or the new card from Guilds of Ravnica, Crackling Drake, although that one doesn't care about exile as much.
Yeah.
Or mana for delve creatures. And so I had additional threats in hand, and while it would have been, you know, a cheeky little Psychotog kill, at the time it felt like too many resources would have been put into saving my creature.
Sure.
When I just had other threats.
Yeah,
Well,
all I
then there's
gotta
also
do.
the value, like, once you've already, like, expended all those resources on keeping Psychotog alive, its value of being in play is just also way lower.
It's certainly less threatening. I think that was, I mean, that definitely came up where I would have fallen short of lethal berserk damage after that exile. It would have required a couple of spicy draws to get me out.
And then finally, the winner's bracket was myself versus Jer. Jer, how do you remember this one going down?
We traded off resources early. I was playing a bunch of walls that either drew me cards or threatened to make mana.
Yeah. And
I kept blocking. You kept expending resources.
I had to use pump spells to try and get through your walls.
And then I played Thragtusk.
Oh, right, right.
There was the game where Serge had Leonin Arbiter, a hate bear that is symmetrical, and Spirit of the Labyrinth, a hate bear that was symmetrical. And it didn't work out well for you.
Oh, I forgot. So,
Vendilion Click is powerful with your opponent's Spirit of the Labyrinth.
I had Spirit of the Labyrinth in play, and you just kept flickering Vendilion Clique, and I just kept losing cards. Oh, I forgot how much that hurt. I forgot how much that hurt.
Anytime somebody gets ranched by their own Spirit of the Labyrinth, an angel gets its wings. It's beautiful.
Ben
I
cries.
think you mean petard.
Ben cries
hoisted.
tears of joy.
Yeah, I felt, as the aggro deck, I wasn't able to put enough pressure on Jer. And then as soon as Jer started getting card advantage, which happened fairly early, every time I had to expend an extra card to take one of his, there's just no coming back because he wasn't close enough to dead. And that's a question I have. I'm going to have to revisit this list. I don't know if I need to make it faster or more mid-rangey, like which direction to go. I'm not a very experienced aggro player, so it's always interesting to see how to shift that.
We have a bunch of new tools to play with Boros, and I mean, it's definitely the time to tinker with that deck again, see if it works. And I think that the wisdom is to not try and make it a mono red deck or a white weenie deck, because that's always the problem that we've said is plagued
with Boros. Why not just
Because it's like, oh, we'll put all the best cards from both decks, and it'll become worse than both. Somehow, maybe it needs to be a third archetype.
You got to take advantage when you're playing a deck like that has such a, when the first thought that you have when you build like a Boros deck is like, oh, red and white, these are aggressive things. I should just be something that's blindly aggressive. You have to ask, why am I building it Boros as opposed to something like mono white or mono red?
Yeah.
So you want to capitalize on the best parts of those colors, which is probably where having more disruption from the 2s and 3s that red gives you, like Magus of the Moon or
like I want to
Rampaging Ferocidon.
Yeah.
I wasn't playing that.
But why?
Why didn't I? Because I'm not an experienced aggro player. I would have hosed you with that card. If I played Rampaging Ferocidon against the life gain Blink deck.
Yeah. So if
I assumed it was in your deck.
This does remind me that like the next, if I ever get around to sleeving this deck up, I did want to try Boros Hate Bears.
That's kind of what I was going.
In this kind of style.
Yeah. I sent this for your approval and nobody...
Well, I mean, we were in direct competition with each other.
I feel betrayed.
Well, that's the thing. When you send somebody a list, it's like really easy to say this card doesn't belong, but it's really hard to say you're missing this exact one card. Unless it's like
Ferocidon.
Jite.
So for those of you who don't know what Rampaging Ferocidon, 3 mana 3/3 dinosaur for 2 and a red. It has menace. It also says Menace. Players can't gain life. But wait, there's more. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, Rampaging Ferocidon deals 1 damage to that creature's controller. This would have been so good against you.
Yeah, banned in standard.
Yep.
Oh, I'm so angry with myself for forgetting about this. All right.
You know what else would be good?
Yo.
Containment Priest. Does that work?
Yeah. It's real good against the flicker effect.
Which one's Containment Priest? I had Containment Priest. I think I even resolved it against you, didn't I?
You did.
But it was too late at that point.
Yes.
Yeah, that's too bad. All right, Jer, any final thoughts as the current reigning North 100 champion?
It feels great. I'd like to thank everyone.
Oh, damn it.
No, the deck went really well.
It went really well.
I drew above average during that tournament, but I actually think it's a reasonable deck to play. I think, like, I've been playing the deck a bunch on Magic Online, MitGo, and I definitely have a positive win rate against the people I've played on there, and people underestimate the value that you can start accruing. Like, I've won so many games being down under 5 life, and then the next turn I'm at 18 plus, just because I take that one turn to, like, put the engine in play, then they attack me but not quite kill me. Then
like,
the
engine's
online, the engine's online, and I'm never losing. And they're like, "Haha, I'm almost won," but they just don't realize what I've been setting up.
I'm just having flashbacks now from.
Well, yeah, and you
were Tusk for days.
You're the same way. You were convinced. You're like, no, if I put on enough pressure, I just won't let you set up the engine. But the value creatures are just so good at stymieing aggro. Like, you're just playing Kitchen Finks, Reflector Mage, Wall of Blossoms, Wall of Omens, Wall of Roots, like all these cards that are just great at stifling aggressive draws already.
What do you think? What do you think hoses your deck? Combo and control, maybe?
Definitely linear decks that have a more powerful game plan, because there's no combo aspect to this deck. It's not going to win terribly quickly.
Okay.
So I've played this deck a couple times in local tournaments, and the matchups that I really struggled with were Hoof, which is just a more powerful linear deck. Like, they're not interacting with me. I'm barely...
They don't care about your walls in the early game. They're just going to combo.
I'm barely interacting with them, but on, like, turn 5, they're just going to Hoof and attack me for 80.
Okay.
And then I can't gain enough life or put enough toughness in play to stop that happening.
Sure.
And any linear combo deck that isn't based around artifacts or enchantments. I can deal with artifacts and enchantments pretty darn well.
Poor Ben. Yeah, just like how many Night of Autumns does it take before Ben just cries?
But decks like High Tide or Storm or like a Show and Tell deck, I'm pretty much not interacting. Like, Vendilion Click is basically my only way to interact with anybody's hand, or I have Venser to interact with spells in the stack.
Right.
That's pretty thin, honestly. So those decks are definitely poor matchups.
All right, and a reminder that you can find the replay for that over at the live channel, YouTube.com/LoadingReadyRun. We'll put the link down below. We won't make you hunt for it too far. All right, let's move on to part 2 of our episode, something that we have labeled incorrect assumptions. Now, this is basically when you get got. And it's kind of hard to describe. I'll start using words and then feel free to jump in, where you're sitting down across from your opponent and you know what deck they're on, and your assumptions about the cards in their deck inform the lines that you make. So, for example, you wouldn't expect the mono red deck to have life gain. Just as a very high example there, so you're never going to play around that. You're going to assume the damage that you have represented on the board is not going to catch you or something like that. This is very different between a metagame thing. So, for example, if you're playing against a mono white deck and they put in a pro red creature, you'd expect to see that type of hate bear, that type of slight shift in there, depending on the metagame. You wouldn't expect a card completely out of outfield. And to start, let's give an example by when Ben got when playing against Pat Pod. I think this will really illustrate what we're trying to talk about here.
Yeah, one of the ways that when we initially started brainstorming this idea, and that I've spoken about this event to many a player that wants to hear how badly I got ranched
it was real bad
in this top 4, is it's subverting the expectations that you have I mean, this can be archetype specific, matchup specific, but I was against a pod deck, a 4-color pod deck, and this is a deck that I've played against hundreds and hundreds of times.
Well, and Pat Pod, you've played it,
and I've played it quite a lot. It's one of, it's not in my immediate wheelhouse, but it's in kind of the that secondary ring. So I have an idea of what to expect. Even on the tournament when I was against Jeremy, thinking about all the different pod lines that he had available. And so that's kind of what's going through my head in this matchup. I'm playing a Jeskai control deck, and I feel like we played this War of Attrition to the point where I'm able to stabilize. I'm able to set up a turn where I get to drop a Consecrated Sphinx. I get a minimum of 2 extra cards from their draw step, and I've exhausted them on most of their removal, or at least the removal that deck plays.
And Consecrated Sphinx dodges basically all of the traditional removal in that deck except Palace Jailer.
Right.
The other removal they have is sometimes Flame Tongue Kavu, sometimes Fire Imp.
Yeah.
And my opponent only had, I think, a Tundra available. So I slam this Consecrated Sphinx, and I'm feeling pretty good, because even if this gets dealt with, they're using resources to deal with it, and I'm up cards.
Well, notably, your opponent hasn't made a lot of headway. They have some like Dirtle creatures, but none of them are threatening combo. They don't have pod in play. They don't have survival in play. They're a little choked on mana, but and they have some cards in hand, but you're not expecting to get combo killed.
I feel safe.
Yeah, because of the assumptions you have of this deck.
Yeah, I assume that I know all the possible lines, or lines beyond like what is considered stock. And then my opponent plays a Swords to Plowshares. And
the Canadians that were behind Ben just like put our hands in our heads and we're like, oh my god, he's playing Swords.
Swords to Plowshares is an extremely powerful card.
Yep.
It's a card that has not, at least to the life of me, ever really appeared in these pod decks, because they're so based around having this density of creatures and then topping out at tutors, combo pieces, or planeswalkers to facilitate your tutors combo pieces.
Well, it's interesting because the original versions had both Swords and Path and like Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm, just like the good cards you put into any Highlander deck.
Right.
But as the deck grew, it began to eschew these cards for cards that just fit into the game plan. So creatures with similar.
The last time
effects.
a pod deck had cast something along the lines of Swords to Plowshares against me was in 2009, 2010.
Really?
So it had been kind of wiped from my slate, and my ears like started ringing. I blacked out. Like it was just like so like, oh my, I got.
And Ben went from like, as soon as Ben played Consecrated Sphinx, I was like, all right, he's won. And then it got Swords, and I'm like, all right, he can't ever win.
And maybe I didn't have, in that immediate moment or that turn, I didn't have any other options, and I should have played out the Sphinx. But it still goes to show that I could have piloted the previous turns differently with the knowledge that my opponent would have access to these cards.
Yeah.
And I would have used I would have traded differently. I would have deployed my threats in a different way. And it's stuff like that where it's such a heads-up inclusion, right? That could be, it could be included for a variety of reasons. The card is incredibly powerful, so why not play it? Or maybe that community is like in the beginning of their life cycle with that pod archetype.
Yeah.
When they're playing these cards, and we've just come full circle.
Well, I love it. They look at this list and they're like, what's wrong with these Victorians? Why aren't they playing the best white removal spell ever printed? What do they know that we don't?
Yeah, so it's instances like this that definitely get me thinking more and more. And it's caught on locally with recent pod list played in Victoria running both Swords and Path.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's come full circle.
Oh, yeah.
Now that's interesting. I want to talk really quickly about playing around a card. And that's, I think, where a lot of this discussion comes from, is you can play around the threats that your deck has. I love the example of playing around Stifle. You think your opponent has it, and it'll influence when you crack a fetch land, when you activate certain abilities, especially in the early game. It never feels good to get stifled. And so the classic example of that is you're playing against a blue player. They play first, they play a fetch land. Your turn, you play a fetch land. On your end step, they crack their fetch land. And so the correct response to play around stifles, you crack yours in response, so they can't stifle you. And that's just on the threat of them having that card in their hand. But when a deck that isn't supposed to play that, or they might, or they're running a Shadow of the Doubt effect or something like that, all the thoughts going in your head is where this conversation comes from.
Can you imagine if High Tide stifled you turn 1?
Well, I mean, it's funny you mentioned, not for High Tide directly, but something very similar, because Stifle is traditionally seen as it's a tempo card. It's very classic tempo.
In the Delver decks.
Delver decks throughout Legacy,
Yeah.
old extended decks, vintage, whatever it may be. And it's not something that you would typically dedicate a card slot in for a traditional control deck. But to the best of my knowledge, Blue Moon, one of the dominant control decks in our format, still plays Stifle.
Does it?
In its arsenal. Yeah. And
Really?
very early on to that deck's rise in the format, people were getting got by Stifle.
I did not know that.
I used to play it in Oath of Druids control because I didn't play it to get people's fetch lands, and people definitely didn't expect it, but its situation came up, and it was largely because they didn't... the situations came up because they didn't play around me having it, but it was included in the deck because one of the creature deck's best ways to remove Oath of Druids was to hit it with Reclamation Sage. But if I had Stifle in my hand, I could let Reclamation Sage resolve Stifle the trigger, and then Oath was online. Because often, if you have Oath in play, the creature decks won't play a creature. They'll just sit there playing Drago, which is ideal for you anyways, because you're the control deck. Eventually, you'll find Forbidden Orchard, and then they have creatures. So they'll try to find Reclamation Sage, and if you're able to stifle their Reclamation Sage, you just win the game.
To tie this into the topic of subverting, to catching people off guard with this too, is we have seen 2 mono blue Stifle effects printed in the past couple of years that are, they become format staples. Disallow being both a counterspell and
go through all the Disallow.
Yeah, Disallow is 1 blue instant. You counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability.
Card's very good.
So it's a counterspell or stifle split card,
right.
Basically.
And then Nimble Obstructionist being another big one. 2 and a blue for a 3/1 flying bird wizard ? That has cycling for 2 and a blue. That says when you cycle Nimble Obstructionist, you counter target activated or triggered ability you don't control. So people have the idea that Stifles are in this format, but it's all around 3s.
Yeah.
So I know as a combo player, if sometimes if my blue opponent, they haven't been countering certain things or whatnot, you just get that gut feeling that there's a bird waiting to, counter some memory jar trigger or something like that.
Or they clique you or something like that.
Exactly.
Against sort of like the blue flash deck now. There's so many effects.
So you cement it in your head that if they have 3 up and they're in that play pattern, that they'll have a Stifle. And then if they tap lower, you kind of convince yourself that, all I have to worry about would be something like Spell Snare or Spell Pierce. Cheap counterspells, 1-mana counterspells. And then you get stifled. And it feels awful. But that's what happens when you get conditioned to play around these very specific mana costs for effects.
Yeah. So what is the lesson that can be learned here? Because obviously one of the things that you want to do that helps a lot as a Magic player is to be familiar with your matchup, to practice it a lot, to know what your game plan is to win, to know what your opponent's game plan is to win, and obviously to either do yours faster or disrupt theirs. When this element is introduced, how do you adjust?
Well, this element is just confirmation bias.
Uh-oh.
You're using your bias to confirm what your opponent has without actually knowing what they have. And so it has like pros and cons, as you mentioned, because like if it enables you to play, if they're playing the exact list you think they are, like Ben and I do this all the time just because we've played so much Highlander that we'll assume they're playing something at least very close to this list that we've played or we know of a winning list, and most of the time that's true.
Yeah.
But sometimes we'll get our Consecrated Sphinx
blown
Swords to
up.
Plowshares.
I got once. This is when Ben was on a tear with Jeskai mid-range. And I sat down across somebody and I saw the first 3 or 4 lands that they were playing. I was like, all right, they're on Jeskai mid-range. You know, the deck is shaping up to be like that. All right, I need to be aggressive. I'm going to overextend a little bit so that I can punch through some damage. And they're like, Supreme Verdict. I'm just like, but pardon?
What?
Well, yeah.
Why is this mid-range deck playing Wrath? I just got so hard.
I think Supreme Verdict resonates in a mid-range strategy with somebody sitting at this table here.
Yeah. So one of the classic archetypes I've played, or I haven't played that much recently, but I'm known for playing years ago, is Bant midrange or Bant control.
Okay.
And I've got people with this curve so many times. Back then it was simpler times. There's many fewer combo decks. Most people were just battling out with creatures. And so the advantage Bant gave you is that in the control matchups, you got the green threats, which were very good.
Yep.
And you got...
Back in simpler times.
Yeah, it wasn't even that long ago.
You had to walk 10 miles.
So the curve is you play Voice of Resurgence, which is a good aggressive mid-rangey card.
Yep.
Very good against control, good against aggro. Loxodon Smiter, which is another mid-rangey card, good against control, good against aggro. And then, so your opponent would be matching with their 2, their 3, their 4, and then you play Supreme Verdict. And you just wrath everything away, and then you're just set up to play the long game. You have tons of 6s in your deck, tons of 5s in your deck.
Where's the wisdom in wrathing your own board? Like that's a common idea that if you're the aggro or the creature deck, you don't wrath your own board.
Well, the thing is, if you're playing Voice and Loxodon Smiter, they have to commit to the board to answer or at least keep your threats at bay. And both these creatures are very good at attacking or being annoying while they're in play. Like, Loxodon Smiter is always getting in play and then is a 4/4 for 3 mana, so chances are it gets to attack through whatever your opponent plays.
Also, not to put too fine a point on it, but a Voice comes back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is after you wrath, you still get the Voice token, so you're rebuilding from something, whereas they're ideally rebuilding from nothing.
This kind of line has reached almost meme status locally. And while it's not always immediate 2, 3, 4 for the Wrath, that play has happened for certain.
The other thing you can do is just play Voice on 2, Loxodon Smiter on 3, then look like you're holding up a counter spell for a couple turns. They keep committing to the board because they're like, all right, went turn 2 Voice of Resurgence, turn 3 Loxodon Smiter. The last thing they're expecting is Supreme Verdict. So you're sort of inducing your opponent into making incorrect assumptions about your deck list. And that by playing those 2 cards, then the thought of any wrath effect is out of their mind. Yeah, or at least symmetrical wrath effect.
They fell for the bait, but it was the wrong bait.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Whoops.
I mean, this is...
Another really
go ahead, yeah.
Another really classic example is the Storm strategies, is when people really started gunning for them, or when they started experimenting with different cards. Like, the disruption you expect from Storm decks traditionally is silence effects.
Yep,
so things that stop you playing things on your turn.
You resolve silence and then you win.
Sort of Defense Grid and City of Solitude accomplish the same things.
Yep.
And then hand attack, so Thoughtseize, Duress, Inquisition of Kozilek, those types of things. But when Mana Drain was 0, some of the Storm decks started playing Mana Drain.
Woof.
And the worst feeling in the world was when you were a proactive deck, especially a blue deck, where you didn't have to tap out, but you had to get a threat in play at some point. And so you're like, all right, I'll tap out on turn 3 for my Brimaz, then never tap out again. Brimaz will kill him. Then they mana drain your Brimaz, then cast Behold the Beyond, and you're dead.
That's just good magic.
Just to take a step back as to why the Storm deck, why the combo deck plays that way, the effects, hand attack lets you see if your opponent is shields down. So if they hand attack you and you're the control deck, they can see if you have any type of disruption, so they can kill you that turn, because they're all in. The silence effect, the 1 mana instant, you can't play spells or abilities, you just shut them off that turn. You're like, cool, if this resolves, you can't win. Are those sort of effects that they're proactive. It's the combo player saying, are you dead? and then they look at your hand and they either say, yes, you're dead, or they say, I'll keep waiting.
Yeah.
So for there to be a reactive answer is very, very bizarre. And I think is that a good way to sort of analyze that?
Well, the combo player is typically the one that is setting up the tempo of the match.
Yeah.
Right.
At least against control decks.
Yeah. They want to try and kill them on... The combo player is trying to kill your opponent, the control opponent, on their own terms. And by having, like you said, the proactive thought seizes, silences, they're able to set that up. And when, again, like in the days of Drain at 0, and even now with Bound Determined, Bound being the, or is it Determined?
Yeah, can you talk about this
Determined.
card?
So one of the sides of this split card, there we go. Oh, I thought we wouldn't have to crane our necks.
This isn't even a new card. This is from Guilds.
Yeah, it's from Dissension.
It's part of me.
So Determined is a green and a blue side of a split card. It says other spells you control can't be countered by spells or abilities this turn, and you draw a card.
Ooh.
So this is something that more recent Storm builds have added into their disruption
I hadn't
suite.
seen this. Interesting.
It's sort of like another silence type effect. Where
Totally.
It's very similar to Autumn's Veil.
How this card has been out for years.
Oh, I was playing this bad boy in like Heartbeat combo in like 2008, 2009.
Like, is it because of the colors? Like the green splash?
Well, I mean,
It's also just 2 mana.
you draw a card. You can just cycle it in matches where the other text on that is irrelevant, which is quite nice.
Definitely. And another thing the Storm decks used to do after mana, like even after Mana Drain got pointed, was they started playing alternate win conditions. And so people would be set up to beat them on like the tendrils aspect. They'd like set up counter rituals, counter the tutor, but they started playing Auriok Salvagers with Lotus
Bomberman.
and go Bomberman style with
Bomberman.
Lotus and a spell bomb.
Bomberman.
Pyrite spell bomb.
Pomeranian?
And then for a while the Storm decks also started playing Empty the Warrens, where
Holy moly.
one thing about the Highlander Storm decks is the Storm decks rarely have their payload in their hand. That's actively not where they want it because it doesn't work with the traditional best Storm lines. Like it disables Lion's Eye Diamond. It makes Yawgmoth's Will much worse. It makes Behold the Beyond uncastable, largely. So it makes many of their engine cards much, much worse if they have their Tendrils of Agony in their hand. Whereas Empty the Warrens gives them access to just Storm from their hand, which is an access that the Highlander Storm builds basically don't have access to a large portion of the time. Like,
Is there also not situations where you don't have to cast it for lethal?
Yeah.
You just get inevitability?
that's the other thing, is that the Storm deck is a turn 3 or 4 deck, whereas it makes it much more possible to turn 1 or 2 cast Empty the Warrens for
8 or
6
10.
six copies, and that's probably good enough.
Yeah, it's kind of a joke of the short drills where you just like tendrils them for 6 or 8 life, mostly to survive. Rarely is it good, but like the short empty, where you just make 8 goblin tokens, 10 goblins, 6, whatever, like in that area is, I mean, sometimes it gives you enough pressure that your opponents have to dedicate resources to dealing with that while you set up to kill them in another way. And sometimes you don't even need to kill them in another way.
And lots of times people will know you're on Storm and they'll keep very polarizing hands against you because of the deck choice they know you're on. So they're way less likely to keep things like Wrath of God in their hand because normally that card is
Not very good.
stone useless.
Yeah.
They'll be way less likely to keep any sort of removal, so they're just less likely to have the tools to deal with Empty the Warrens, especially once it resolves.
So that's interesting. That's another assumption coming from a Highlander player, because if you're a Legacy player, you know Empty the Warrens is in a lot of those Legacy Storm lists, right?
Yeah,
Like
even sometimes main deck.
Yeah, so that's something, that's some of the bias coming from us to think that, oh, of course the Storm deck isn't going to play Empty the Warrens.
You know,
Exactly, and that's sort of, sorry Alex, this is why this is one of the most interesting topics to me, is because it can get the most, like, the more enfranchised you are, the more susceptible you are to this. Like, the reason Ben got so badly by that Swords to Plowshares is because of how well he knows that deck and that archetype. And as he said, he's been playing against it probably more than 100 times in the past 6 years, and not once has he played against that. So he's relying on his experience in that matchup to know how he should play and how like what his game plan should be. And the addition of that one card just completely sewered his game plan.
You're gonna say, Alex.
I was gonna say what this sort of sounds like when you're talking about legacies, that like sometimes it's a prediction. It's like, what archetype are they on? In Highlander, a lot of the decks are sometimes like mashups of several adjacent archetypes, and you're like, which ones are in here, and which versions of which one are in here?
Yeah. What version of graveyard creature combo are you on?
Yeah.
You know, if you're the Hermit Druid deck, do I have to worry about killing one creature, your Laboratory Maniac, or is it a different one?
I mean, maybe that's part of why I wanted to build Fair Hermit, because it's just like, oh, it's like some sort of rock humans deck. Wait, what?
Well, even more fair decks, like the tempo decks in our format. Legacy, right? The Legacy tempo decks play 12 to 16 creatures in them. And 4 of those are most likely Delver of Secrets.
Yeah.
But in our format, a lot of the threats are, not coming down on turn 1. They're in fact 2-drops. And they're old traditional Miracle Grow creatures, like Quirion Dryad or Deeproot Champion.
Or
there's Deeproot Elite, Deeproot Champion. They look the same.
Champion's the one you want.
Champion's that's the good stuff. And so you have to, we don't have access to multiple copies of Delver. So you have to go into those matchups expecting to deal with a bunch of 4/4s on the ground instead of 3/2s in the air.
Yeah.
And again, anytime these tempo decks start shaving cards like this and move back to more cards in more flyers, more cheaper threats too.
Like Gaia's Skyfolk.
Yeah, exactly. Another great example. Where
what is Gaia's Skyfolk?
So
it's a green-blue for a 2/2 flyer, and it's a Merfolk elf.
Yeah.
what?
Great card.
Those are some relevant types.
Well.
Oh, Therese Nielsen art.
Oh yeah.
Huh.
So this is another example of people, blue-green tempo, known as Sorensen tempo, is something that's been around since the beginning of this format. And there have been slight variations to it, but nothing that really kind of extends out of the realm of what you're expecting when you sit across from someone on that. I believe a couple of years ago, maybe even earlier than that, a version of this deck popped up that was playing basically every Gaia's Skyfolk it had access to.
Wow.
So when people were expecting to just gum up the board and try to fight that way and exhaust them on resources, Gaia's Skyfolk, Ice Feather, even,
wow.
Yeah, you just start getting pecked away by this
Welcome
damage
turn.
that you can't deal with.
Welcome turn.
Oh yeah, welcome turn.
It's almost flying, man.
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
2 power flyers. Yeah.
Jeez,
That's
I
very
don't
neat.
want to play this now.
All right, let's sort of end this with a discussion of, are there any times that you have changed your own list to try and get somebody?
To try and get somebody as opposed to just metaing normally.
Yeah, to try and induce people into playing incorrectly against you. So there was a time I did this. I built a red-green mid-range deck that I affectionately call Orcish Lumberjack Aggro. And by and large, it looked a lot like red-green aggro, like traditionally would. You played, instead of playing aggressive 1-drops, you played elves, and then you had all the aggressive 3-drops that red-green aggro would play, most of the aggressive 4s plus some, and then you also played 5s and a couple 6s.
Holy
so
moly.
You basically played no 2-drops in the deck. And instead of playing Moxes, you played the bigger mana jumps. So you played Mana Vault, Mana Crypt, and Black Lotus. I played, but probably not correct. But you gotta flex sometimes.
Soul Ring for the sensible people at home.
Yeah, Soul Ring plus Mox almost certainly better. But one in one game, I particularly remember just getting my opponent because they weren't expecting the lines of play I had access to. I went turn 1 elf, it resolved. Then turn 2, they were on the play, so they had 2 mana up. They were a blue deck. I could see they were just ready to counter whatever I played, so I played a Courser of Crufix. They countered it. Then I played Black Lotus, Mana Vault, Thundermont. And and after they countered my Courser of Crufix, they started untapping because they knew the deck. They knew like I was unlikely to slow roll Moxes. Like what was I gonna do? Like gut shot them? So they started untapping. I'm like, hang on, I'm not done. And they're like, oh, like what else could you have? And then I played Black Lotus, cracked it for red mana, played Mana Vault, played Thundermaw Hellkite, and attacked them. And their eyes were popping out of their head. Their jaw was on the floor. Whoa. They were like, what kind of red-green aggro deck is this? And I'm like, I never said I was playing red-green aggro. You did.
Wow.
And then I played Black Lotus is a really good name for like memoirs.
Man.
I had a weird example, and this probably came off the back of a random conversation I had with Ben Wheeler, but we were experimenting with Enchantress for a while here. And I don't know, I'm going to assume the conversation went something like this. Hey, Serge, I got a great idea on how you should play Enchantress. Cut all the Enchantresses, put an Oath of Druid, and have Emrakul. So when they start coming against you and trying to pressure you before you set up your lock piece, you slam Oath into Emrakul.
Holy moly.
I don't. No,
there was one other piece of that. The other piece of that is you also play Eternal Witness, so that you can hit your replenish and then bring everything back after you've milled your whole deck off the Oath of Druids. So it was.
Bruh.
Yeah.
Well, Enchantress is one of these funny matchups, right? Where like the deck, aside from Argothi and Enchantress just being the best thing available for that. Your other Enchantress effects all just die to shock. So
3 mana 0/2s.
It's one of these weird instances where you're like a lock piece kind of prison-y combo deck that has a ramp. It's just a whole mashed potato.
A mess.
Yeah.
Oh,
but then
Enchantress is such a mess.
Like to get you off the ground if your opponent has shock and you're just like, oh well, there goes my game plan.
Awkward.
You done anything spicy like this?
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm a pretty conventional Magic player, and I tend to not next level people. The most, I think, would be putting in a card like Berserk.
Just trying to get them?
To just blindside people.
Oh, yeah.
Just be like, okay, this deck seems pretty aggressive, and then I'm like, you know, what's your life total? Beep, beep! Get him! I mean, it's maybe just screwing up math a little bit. They're just like, oh, okay, I can withstand this many, this many attacks. And it's like, what about twice that many? Not so much.
Yeah, I was actually talking to Jer about this earlier this morning, where for a while I was playing a variation of a pod deck, but instead of the 4-color, you know, grindy kind of combo version that we all expect, swords or plowshares may or may not be included. I was playing a rug version that was very aggressive, kind of a callback to the original pod survival
Shout out
decks.
to Brett Frankson.
Yeah, of the format.
And so 30-point pod deck before
Dark Times. And I had in one of the first matches that I played with the deck, I just kind of had a general pod kill, where I was just like, all right, Deceiver, Exarch, Kiki Jiki, Infinite Cleric things kill you. Like, just boring kind of...
Yeah, and your opponent's like, okay,
mom and pop magic, you know? Mom and pop magic! Yeah, just, you know, good old-fashioned, play one thing, play another, and kill you. And so...
Richie Gee intended.
my opponent was, I imagine they were on just like, oh, you're playing pod. Okay, I gotta watch out for being combo killed, all that kind of stuff. They don't typically care about Elvish Visionaries and whatnot. And going into the next game, I had a very similar start. Mana Dork into an end-of-turn Deceiver Exarch. And after the match and talking to my opponent, they had a disruption available for Splinter Twin or Kiki Jiki. So just like shock, kind of like, I can deal with that part of it. So if he tries to go for the combo, easy peasy lemon squeezy, just like stop it in its tracks. But then I untap, play a Gaia's Cradle, slapped a Sword of Feast in
Wow! Oh no!
Smashed with my Deceiver Exarch untapped my lands and deployed like a Thrun.
Yeah.
So
Fooled you!
kind of setting up, and decks like that get to really take advantage of this. One of the more recent kind of examples is I play eggs a lot. It's my pride and joy.
Oh, baby.
And eggs is you're all in on combo. That's it.
Perfect.
It's chicken egg.
Nailed it.
Do you play Scramble versus eggs?
I don't think there's a card called egg in the eggs list. Beach.
There's
Yeah, there
5
Dark
cards.
water egg.
We
sorry.
got dark water egg. We got mossfire egg. We got sungrass egg. We got sky cloud egg,
yeah.
And then we've got
Red, black.
red black.
I thought the joke was eggs.
shadow
didn't-
blood egg.
I didn't
you're
think
right.
I didn't think eggs actually.
You
played
know what the
eggs.
deck is
Oh,
named
no.
after,
But
right?
I thought it was named after rocks that you crack like an egg. I
Yes.
didn't think it was literally named
no,
after eggs.
Serge, you got to crack a couple eggs to make a 4-0. No, not rock egg. So eggs is very much I'm going to kill you combo, that's it. Maybe go off to make some Thopter tokens. But with Thopter, Foundry, Sword of the Meek, so still on a combo kind of plan.
Life Spark Spell Bomb is a legitimate win condition, Ben.
Oh yeah, I
what?
mean, you don't have to tell me
I'm
that.
sorry. What is a life spark spell bomb? I don't even think I've heard of this card.
It's one mana artifact to play. You pay 1 colorless, sacrifice it, draw a card. You pay a green, sacrifice it. Target land becomes a 3/3 creature. Very handy in turning your own lands into creatures to block their threats, as well as I've definitely gotten close to like 20ing people with Life Spark Spell Bombs
No,
and
sir,
bringing
I
them
don't
back
like
or
it.
copying it. No, this is beautiful magic.
Yeah.
Anyways, going from an all combo kind of narrative with the deck to including cards like Monastery Mentor.
Pardon?
Monastery Mentor.
No, I heard what you said. You played that in eggs?
Should I shout it again? Well, I've given
It
it a
triggers
shot.
off non-creature
Because it's
spells.
non-creature spells, every artifact.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is the reason
it's not-
Wizards is going from prowess, non-creature to instants and sorceries.
Holy
It's
moly.
literally just Ben.
Monastery Mentor.
It's just Ben.
Well, I mean, the vintage community has something to do with
Oh, I
it too.
forgot how good prowess is. All your artifacts.
Yeah, so 2 and a white for a 2/2 with prowess. When you cast a non-creature spell, you put
Sorry,
a
say that a
1/1
little bit louder. Non-creature
spell. So this
Holy
includes
moly.
artifacts such as Black Lotus, Life Spark Spell Bomb,
Any of the eggs, yeah.
Mox Opal, and the deck is quite good at playing many copies of this, sometimes infinite copies
Wow.
of these artifacts.
So you get the boys while you build your.
I
Doomsday
bring
machine.
all the boys to the yard. And if Monastery Mentor doesn't work, you can play Psy Master Thopterist.
Sorry, what?
This is a newer card.
Master Thopterist. It's a 2 and a blue for a 1/4 legendary creature. When you cast an artifact spell, you make a 1/1 Thopter with flying.
Yo!
And
This
you can
card's
pay
real
1
good.
and a blue, sack 2 artifacts to draw a card.
This
Yo!
card's
So
really
it
good.
plays on both game plans.
Yeah. I've actually thought about putting this in Workshop Weenie.
So cards like this that play into the strategy, when people typically just mulligan away all their aggressive cards, or they play
All their removal.
all their removal.
Yeah, they want to keep the aggressive
They
cards,
want to
so-
keep the aggressive cards, but I mean these cards also stunt
Yep.
their aggressive draws.
Yeah, 1/4,
that's
that booty.
That's a big butt. And like having Thopters for days.
Yep.
It's building up a board with these cards is very easy, and also kind of plays into everything that your opponent is trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's do a quick little summary on anything here. Anything else you'd like to add on incorrect assumptions? We've covered how you get got, how to try and get your opponent, the differences between this and sort of not sideboarding, but trying to like make little metagame changes. Jer.
So the biggest thing I want to point out that we haven't talked about yet is that if you're trying to introduce these into decks that you play, they basically only work if you're going to be more proactive than your opponent and they have to react to you. It's very difficult to do it when you're the reactive deck. You can do it, but it's much more difficult and typically less effective.
Yeah, it's excellent. Gentlemen?
use sleeves that don't represent what your deck actually is. I'm only half joking.
That's so funny. The plain sleeves, you're like, mount and go. And they're like, oh, man.
Yeah, I show up in mono blue sleeves, slam the tattoos, throw down the brainstorm playmat, and go mountain goblin gun.
They're like, oh no!
Mountain lava spike you.
Yeah. I want to say just don't beat yourself up if you get got.
Yeah.
Because, like, you can't, Highlander, you have a card pool of like 14,000 cards.
Yep.
So if you end up getting blown out by something that you haven't seen for years,
write it down.
Yeah. Well, also, there's no sideboard. There's no sideboard, so people are going to have weirdo inclusions in their list just to try and beat a metagame that you might not be part of the conversation of.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, and you just gain more experience every time you get got, and then you're less likely to get got like that again.
Unless you get got because of your experience.
Oh.
Well,
I know.
Next level.
All right, everybody, that's going to be our episode for today. Let us move to our closing segment, Powerful Magic. Thank you. And up today, we got Ben.
So this one was from 2018, so it's recent. I was playing
That's this year.
It is? I have zero concept of time. I may be a time traveler.
All right.
So I'm playing a Worldgorger Dragon combo deck.
Real quick, how does that combo work for the people who might not be familiar?
Well, Serge, I'm glad you asked. Worldgorger Dragon is a 6-mana 7/7 with flying and trample. But you usually ignore all that part. It says, when it enters the battlefield, you exile all other permanents you control.
That seems bad.
But when it leaves the battlefield, you return everything that's been exiled back into play.
Now I'm real confused.
So this includes lands, enchantments, artifacts, auras.
All right.
And the big ones are, I'm trying to think of the one that has the least wordy wording. I believe Animate Dead. No, this is just
that one's a nightmare.
This is a losing battle, no matter what we do.
I actually think Dance of the Dead is the best one.
Dance of the Dead. Let's go with Dance of the Dead. So, the combination of... this is the problem.
Oh, my eyes!
Would you like me to read it?
No.
Yes, I actually can't read that.
Okay, it's an enchantment aura for 1 and a black. It's enchant creature card in a graveyard. When Dance of the Dead enters the battlefield, if it's on the battlefield, it loses, quote, enchant creature card in a graveyard, end quote, and gains, quote, enchant creature put onto the battlefield with Dance of the Dead, end quote. Put enchanted creature card onto the battlefield, tapped, under your control, and attach Dance of the Dead to it. When Dance of the Dead leaves the battlefield, that creature's controller sacrifices it. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. At the beginning of upkeep of enchanted creature's controller, that player may pay 1 and a black. If the player does, untap that creature.
So extremely straightforward.
That's the Oracle text.
Sorry, could you read that one more time? To make this easy, it
brings a creature from your graveyard to play.
The deck plays a series of enchantments that when they ETB, they bring a creature from the graveyard to play.
And notably, when they leave, they don't exile that creature.
Right. The creature just goes back to the graveyard.
And it's important that they're permanents and not spells like Reanimate.
Yes. So you play this. It brings back a Worldgorger Dragon, which you've discarded or put into your graveyard.
Yeah.
The dragon triggers getting rid of Dance of the Dead.
Okay.
Which causes the dragon to go away. When the dragon goes away, the Dance of the Dead comes back.
Yeah.
Which causes the dragon to come back.
Which causes
the
dragon to go away.
Your lands are also leaving and coming back each time.
During this entire
And most of the time they enter untapped.
Yeah, you're adding mana every single loop, infinite mana.
Or if you happen to be lucky enough and have a Bazaar in play.
Which, if you have a Bazaar Baghdad, that tends to work out quite well.
Or Nephalia Drownyard. This is, for all those of you asking me about Nephalia Drownyard decks, this is the only one.
Drownyard,
interesting.
Yeah, Drownyard has put up Highlander victories. It's
you
just
mill them
only
out each time. If you have 3 lands plus Drownyard every time it ETBs, you mill them for 3.
You need 8 Watery Grave plus Drownyard.
And so the traditional kill,
right.
The traditional kill is either you Drownyard them out, you play Una, Queen of the Fae, which you effectively are milling them out.
Mill fireball them.
Yeah.
Oh, because you get infinite mana, and then you activate it for X. X is equal to the number.
Is there a reason you don't just fireball?
Well, this one is...
You might not be playing red.
This one is... The creatures are key because if you're milling your deck, or if you've already put this into your graveyard somehow, on the last time that Animate Dead or Dance of the Dead comes back, you can bring this.
Yeah.
Because if you have no other legal targets, you will draw that game, which I have done.
Well, it's actually strategic sometimes. If you're losing or you're like about to lose and there's no other creatures in the graveyard, you can just like start the combo with no way to end the loop and maybe just start the game.
Makes me feel like a real jerk when I've done it, but
all right. So I've derailed it here. Let's get Ben back on track with the story. Sorry, yeah.
So you kill through these combo means, right?
Yeah.
The deck also plays a lot of 2 mana creatures that have some kind of looting effect or ETB effect to draw. So I'm just going to throw out Merfolk Traders as an example.
Not looter, bold.
Well, looter needs to tap in order to get the loot, but the Traders is an ETB.
I understand.
So while you're looping with Worldgorger. So I played a couple, I'm in a matchup against a control opponent. They're not killing me. I'm barely killing them. I have like a Merfolk Traders in play, and I'm just turning it sideways.
Nice.
It's done about 5 damage, which is all right.
That's respectable.
And my opponent doesn't really feel as though their life total is much of a, like, they get to use it as a resource because I'm not killing them with this Merfolk Traders. Surely they're not going to die to cards like Merfolk Traders. And so they're thought seizing, dealing damage to themselves, playing shocklands, cracking fetches, and they get to about 12 or so. Now my deck plays pretty much every reanimation spell that is under 4 mana, and I have a Lotus Petal in play because speed is key.
Okay.
And I have maybe 10, 12, 13 lands at this point. Like, this is being a slugfest. We've got nothing really in our hands. And then I go to draw for my turn, and I look at my Lotus Petal, and I look at the card I've drawn, and then I turn it sideways because that card is Life Death.
Oh!
Now, Life Death, you play it for the death side of this split card, which is a 2-mana version of Reanimate. You just bring a creature back from the graveyard, and you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. But the life part is a 1-green sorcery. All lands you control become 1/1 creatures until end of turn. They are still lands.
I've considered playing this in Aristocrats. I've never made it, like, because you cast it, and then you just, like, blow up all your lands and kill them. Well, it's probably not that great.
It's funny you mentioned turning all your lands into things to kill them. Because I did just that. I cracked my Lotus Petal. I cast life. My opponent contemplated their own life and everything that had led up to this moment. And then I turned everything sideways and smashed them for about 15.
Holy moly.
Felt good.
That's fantastic. What a win con in the Reanimate deck. All right. Well, everybody, friends, that is going to be our episode for the day. A reminder, if you're looking for the link, we'll make sure to include that in the description down below. Anyways, thanks for watching. A reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. From us to you, thanks for watching. You're wonderful, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.